Crohn's and colitis are different diagnoses. So the question is, how do we treat them differently when it comes to treatments? What do we do on the natural spectrum? So I'm going to be showing you how we treat Crohn's and colitis naturally and what might be unique to each condition. You're going to learn, number one, what makes these diseases different from each other, why this is so important to understand, because it is. And then the last thing we're going to teach you is the steps and systems. I'm going to go through them with you that my team and I have used to reverse over 300 different cases. I'm going to outline those processes so you can learn and understand them yourself. Contrary to what your doctors told you, Crohn's and colitis are reversible. Now, I've helped hundreds of people reverse their bowel disease, and I'm here to help you do it too, because inflammation always has a root cause. We just have to find it. This is the Reversing Crohn's and Colitis Naturally podcast. Now, I do these live trainings in my Facebook group every single week and put the audios here for you to listen to. If you want to watch the video versions of these episodes, just click the link in the show notes to get access to our Facebook group and YouTube channel. And for weekly updates, information, tips, and tricks, you can sign up for our email list by clicking the link in the show notes below. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Josh Deck. I'm an IBD specialist, medical lecturer, physician's consultant for IBD, of course, and severe IBS. And I'm also the scientific strategist and education director for the Root Cause for Crohn's Colitis organization. And today we're going to be discussing the difference in treatments between Crohn's and colitis and the steps that you need to take to begin really, truly reversing them. So the first things first that we're talking about, I want to get into the difference of Crohn's and colitis with you, just so you understand why they're different, we'll say medically speaking, as far as a diagnosis is concerned, to help outline what might be different in our approaches to these two conditions. So the first thing I want to look at is in Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is here. Crohn's disease is going to be anywhere from mouth to anus. It can inflame anything, even on the outside, like what we call perianal issues like abscesses, whereas colitis or ulcerative colitis is going to be strictly to the large intestine. And here's the main differences. So Crohn's, anywhere mouth to anus, mouth, esophagus, stomach, small, large bowel, any of those things can be affected. In colitis, it's just the colon. Now, what we typically see as well is a couple other nuances. So the next one we want to look at is what's called transmural or deep layers of issues. So in Crohn's disease, what we'll often see is many layers of tissues can be affected, whereas colitis, it tends to be just the surface layers. Think of this as a difference between slicing your finger, cutting bread or something, slice a deep gouge into it. That's more Crohn's. Colitis is kind of like you tripped on the sidewalk and scuffed your knee, and there's a little bit of a scrape. It's very surface level. That's the first one. The second one that we'll see is a big difference, besides mouth to anus and depth of tissue, of course, is going to be the microbiome. We often tend to see the microbiome in Crohn's disease being much more, we'll say, mangled or messed up, than we do in colitis. In Crohn's disease, what we see, it's called Peyer's patches, P-E-Y-E-R-S. It's called Peyer's patches. What we see is you can get kind of like a Dalmatian. You can get flecks of these patches all throughout the body, primarily the small intestine, but they can happen anywhere else, even the large intestine, whereas colitis tends to be one large or small stretch that may be inflamed throughout the way. And that's really the difference. It's depth, it's location, and it's togetherness. So colitis will be spread, whereas Crohn's disease is all over the place. Those are really our big differences. Now, there are differences in complications we see between Crohn's and colitis, where Crohn's you're prone to things like abscesses, so more sores forming, so to speak, strictures, so narrowing, and fistulas, which is actually an infection that will burrow deeper into these layers. It can actually hollow out and goes really deep. So there's really major infection risks in there that we'll tend to see. Whereas colitis are big complications, what's called toxic megacolon. So that's the entire bowel can become infected and highly inflamed. We're going to see a higher risk of colon cancer. On the other hand, the last piece, I know I said 4 points ago, but it's just a fun side fact. We often say it's genetic in nature. They're not. There are genetic components, but we know it's not a genetic condition. But of the 10 most common genes that we see associated with bowel disease, 4 of them are unique to Crohn's disease, and 2 of them are unique to ulcerative colitis. The rest of them, the other 6, are actually shared. We see them overlapping in both cases. So that's our difference between Crohn's and colitis. What we got to ask now is, what are we going to do to treat them differently? So that we understand how they're different conditions, what I'd love to do is talk about how we treat them differently. But before I go to the specific nuances, let's talk about what we do overall. the things that are going to be the same across the board between both Crohn's and colitis. Because here's the reality of it. Though they're different diagnoses based on presentation, they're both inflammation of the GI tract. They're both inflammatory processes or inflammatory diseases. So there's a lot that we actually do the same between Crohn's and colitis. Let's talk about that. So the first thing that we're going to do in both cases, if we're approaching this naturally, holistically from functional medicine, we want to find the root causes. The analogy I like to use is, in so many of you watching or listening, you'll have had this instance before where you went to the doctor and for whatever reason, you were healthy for 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years. You were perfectly healthy. One day you started getting sick. Over a few short days, weeks, or months, or maybe over many years, whatever it was for you, you suddenly came down ill. Like, oh, it's genetic. It just happened. None of these things just turn on and turn off like a light switch. So there's always a root. The analogy I'll say is this. If you step on a nail and it goes through your foot, and you go to the doctor and they go, it's really bad looking. It's part of your body now, though. There's nothing we can do. So we're going to give you some numbing cream. This will manage that pain for the rest of your life. And if it doesn't work, we'll cut off your foot. It would be insane. You'd look at them like they're crazy. But when it comes to bowel disease, you go all these years of your life perfectly healthy. One day, boom, you're sick out of the blue. They go, yep, it's just genetic. Nothing we can do. Here's some medication to manage for the rest of your life. And if it doesn't work, snip, snip, we can do surgery. We can remove parts of your bowels or all of your bowels. This is nonsense. So something has to be driving it. So this is why we look for the root. We look for the nail, so to speak, in the foot. And that's how we can, the first approach. Now, the next one we want to do across the board for both, and we're going to readdress these shortly, but we're going to address drainage. There are 7 main drainage pathways, and we'll get into those another time. But think of this, how things exit the body, right? So the basics is going to be liver, lymphatics, it's going to be like gallbladder and bile ducts. You're going to see things like your skin, sinuses. This is how things move around and exit the body, okay? And there are 7 main pathways we want to look at. In bowel disease, in Crohn's and colitis, drainage is one of these things that's really junked up. There's so much toxicity floating through the body, so much immune response, so much byproduct. This toxicity just starts to clog up some of these drainage pathways. So what we want to do is start to open them up. So once we've identified the root cause, we begin opening the drainage pathways. And then there's 3 rules we want to approach in diet. And these 3 rules, again, they're the same across Crohn's and colitis. I have only 3 rules that I like to follow. Everyone might do it differently. You might say, oh, the specific carbohydrate or SCD worked for me, or AIP worked for me, or this diet, that diet, brat diet, whatever worked for me. And that's cool. I have 3 rules across the board. The first one, whole foods. So it's a natural food, organic ideally. It grows, it swims or walks, like something that would have been food 1,000 years ago. That is also still food today, because most of what we eat today is not real food. That's rule 1. Rule 2, tolerable foods. These are foods you can eat and they don't cause you problems. The third rule is low histamines, because the immune pathways that trigger bowel disease or that are connected to bowel disease are also connected to histamines. And so if you think of histamines like rashes, hives, itching, throat swelling, anaphylaxis, that's where we see a lot of histamine response. In the cases of bowel disease, histamines can really trigger that same immune response or immune pathway, worsening your condition. So those are my 3 rules: whole foods, tolerable foods, and low histamine foods. The next things we also want to look at when we're dealing with Crohn's and colitis is going to be gut barrier repair. The gut lining is going to be compromised in all conditions. So we want to begin repairing, healing, and sealing that. Now, we mentioned briefly the difference between Crohn's and colitis being the microbiome. Tends to be worse in Crohn's disease, but it can also be quite messy in colitis, depends on the individual. And so we also want to address at some point, typically later down the road, but the gut microbiome. We want to address the imbalances contributing to toxicity, the imbalances contributing to inflammation and the disease processes you're starting to feel. That's another one. Another important one we want to look at is going to be stress management and managing other triggers in both cases, because these drive the immune system and immune pathways. Now, there are some basics we'll see. We tend to see more nutrient deficiency in Crohn's disease because of that, again, that small bowels inflamed, which is where most of your nutrient transport and absorption and breakdown of foods comes from. So we tend to see more nutrient deficiencies in Crohn's disease, whereas colitis is less prominent. We still want to boost both of those things. Even pharmaceuticals, right? Look at all these crossovers. Even pharmaceuticals, 95% of them are going to be used in both cases. There's very few that are really distinct or have yet to be approved for both conditions. So that's another thing. And so what we're doing, I'm going to put besides stress is immune management as well. Now, whether that's through drugs or natural processes, your inflammation is strictly due to an immune response. Inflammation by definition is simply your body's reaction, or it's supposed to be an acute reaction to protect you from something that shouldn't be there. We're simply asking, by addressing the root, what shouldn't be there? Drainage pathways, how do we remove it from the body? How do we take the diet and basically not make the disease process worse with our food? Barrier repair, because that leaks in the gut causes issues with your immune system as well. Microbiome is long-term immune and general health support. And then stress and immune management, because again, you're an immune response. We want to manage that response. These are the things we do the same. What I'm going to do now with you is go through some of the things that we want to do nuanced. What is unique between Crohn's and colitis? You might be surprised at some of these things. Because again, they're different diagnoses, but the conditions have so many nuances where they have so many similarities. And so here's what I want to look at. You'll notice there's an overlap of all the bulk of it, but there are some subtle nuances. So again, colitis, less prone to nutrient deficiencies. Crohn's disease, more prone to nutrient deficiencies. Colitis tends to be more responsive to topical mucosal treatments. So things like aloe, things like that can really, even mesalamine, where it can help manage that inflammation on a topical level. Because again, it's like a scuff. Crohn's disease needs something a lot deeper. We really need to go after the immune system and infection management. That's it. That's my list. That's all that's different. There is so much that's the same. We expect, well, Crohn's and colitis are different diagnoses. They gotta be different. Not really. Crohn's disease, they have different presentations, but similar root causes and similar immune responses. In fact, I would venture to say most people look at a Venn diagram kind of like this. There's a little bit of overlap in the middle. When it comes down to Crohn's and colitis, it's much more like this. There are very subtle nuances for each individual that may be different. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty of what's causing it, how do we address it? What does that look like? What are the nuances? How do we support nutrients? What is diet support, medication support? All these things are almost identical across the board. And maybe you're expecting a different answer from me. Maybe you're expecting this big laundry list of what's different. It's inflammation of the GI tract. The nuances seem to be, from what we understand so far, more related to the genetic expression of these diseases, not the genetic cause. Again, genes don't cause these diseases. They're just involved with. And based on those reactions, those responses, those genes are going to change this outside here, these little bits. This is the genetic variance that we're going to see. But everything else on the inside is going to be addressed the same. And there's one more thing I should add for Crohn's colitis as well. Crohn's disease tends to do well with very low to no fiber. Colitis tends to respond well to things like soluble fiber. Sometimes apple pectin and things like that. But again, very nuanced. Some people can't have any fiber. Some people, I got clients with severe colitis who do great with fiber. Everyone's different. So these are generalized nuances till I have a chance to talk to you individually. There are, we'll say 7 things I'm going to address with you. 7 steps that we'll use to reversing Crohn's and colitis from a natural, holistic, we'll say root cause, functional medicine approach. These are the 7 things we want to do, okay? There's very, very few. So the first thing across the board, like we just talked about, is going to be food. Again, there are 3 rules I want to reiterate with you. Number 1, whole foods. Foods that were foods 1,000 years ago and are still foods today. That's number 1. The second rule is going to be foods you tolerate. Third is low histamine. This is going to be canned foods, fermented foods. It's going to be avocados and spinach. It's going to be cured beets. Things that are fried or deep fried tend to be higher in histamine. Certain processed or packaged ingredients, you can always do a Google search, because certain things like cashews, cheeses, even these whole foods can be high in histamine. So it's important to understand the difference. So that's number 1. Food is our first management. Number 2, we have to identify the root cause. We have to know what is the nail in the foot. What is the thing that caused this issue in the first place? If I'm going in and if I'm a surgeon doing surgery, I have to know what's broken, what I'm trying to fix before I can go after it. I want to know why you're having these issues. Why is it broken? What am I fixing and what are we going through? These are very important. If we don't know the root cause, problem. Common root causes, we're going to see a lot of different things, but really there's only 3 main things that drive bowel disease, or really frankly any disease, okay? And these are big umbrellas I'm going to put up here, but there's 3 major things we want to go after. Number 1, is going to be toxins. Toxins are a lot of things. Toxins, you have everything from EMFs to mold to pesticides, plastics, preservatives, food chemicals, food dyes, all kinds of things that are unnatural. This is why we need whole foods. Unnatural things that contribute to disease or can actually entirely even create disease process. So these are the first steps we want to look at. So root cause, toxins. What chemicals are we adding into our life and our diet that should not be here? In fact, it's these chemicals and toxins that I believe are really driving our bowel diseases because, say, in the last 75 years, this is when we had more chemicals than ever before added to our food supply in our life. We've had a 3,000% increase in bowel disease in the last 75 years. So toxins are a big one. The next one is going to be deficiencies. Now, this is deficiencies, I will say deficiencies of microbiome and nutrients. We have something now called generational dysbiosis, which is generations as we're poisoning ourselves and basically toxifying our systems, antibiotics being used, we're losing our microbiomes. And this has been shown in rat studies. It would just take too long to show in humans, but it's been demonstrated in mouse studies. We're seeing a fair bit of that as well. But deficiencies as well of nutrients, because nutrients are like bricks. Your body's trying to build the house. It needs bricks. It needs tools to do so. And those are your nutrients. And the last one is going to be microbes. Now, we talked about deficiency of microbes. What happens when you're deficient? There's excess space. It's like having an apartment building. If all the rooms are full, every place is rented, you're good. There's a nice balance. As soon as there's vacancy, someone's going to move in, someone you may not want. This is where we see parasites and fungi and clostridia and different types of microbes, viruses that actually enter the body and create issues. And so our three root causes are toxins, deficiencies of nutrients or deficiencies of microbes, and microbial overgrowth or invasive species that shouldn't be there. Those are our root causes. And I would challenge anybody ever to challenge me, tell me otherwise. Send me a study, hundreds of cases, thousands of articles and literature pieces reviewed. This is what it comes down to, three things. So first thing we want to do, step 1 of 7, manage your food. It's like a cup full of water. It's already overflowing. Don't add more water and make the problem worse. And give your body some resources it needs that contributes to deficiencies. Number 2, let's identify the root causes and what's actually driving this issue. Number 3, we're going to go into drainage. Now, drainage is a big part of removing, I'm going to put drainage up here, with removing that root. Because we have to remove it. We can't evict tenants from the building if the doors are locked, but we also have to identify what we're trying to get rid of. And so drainage, this is opening those drainage and detox pathways, opening up your liver, giving yourself a bile support. Supplements like Tudka are phenomenal. Liver support, dandelion, NAC. There's all kinds of supplements we can use to help support the liver. Really important to get those things moving. In fact, liver and bile are probably the largest drainage issue we see across the board. If you're somebody with skin issues, that could be an internal infection coming outward. If you got acne, it could be fungus pushing outward because your drainage is blocked up. It can't get rid of it. It pushes it through the skin, or it's overgrown and these toxins are coming out through the skin. And so we have to open our drainage pathways to remove the problem. Now, remove is the first step of our 5 R's, which means we have 4 more steps of our 5 R's, which is going to give us all 7 steps of how we actually reverse bowel disease. So the next one is going to be replenish. Replenish what? Well, the deficiencies. So the removing is removing the toxin or the microbe, whatever the problem is. Replenish is replenishing your deficiencies, the tools your body needs, the micronutrients, the macronutrients, right? Vitamins, minerals, water, electrolytes, things your body is depleted on. We have to replenish those stores. The next one we want to do is rebuild. This is going to come back to the gut lining. A healthy microbiome where we're deficient, a healthy microbiome cannot live in an inflamed gut. Like, you wouldn't live in a house that's on fire. Your microbes cannot live in an ecosystem that is highly inflamed. Bad guys like to move into those environments. We have excess microbes overgrowing. We have to repair and rebuild those tissues, and we have to repair that microbiome. We're deficient in a microbiome, and we have microbes that shouldn't be there. Not only are we fixing the house that they live in, we need to fix the residents of that building as well. This is where we're repairing the microbes specifically. Lastly, step 7 is rejuvenate your immune system. Here's why. We often hear, oh, I'm sick, I should boost my immune system. If your immune system is more like a teeter-totter, and by boosting it, you are boosting one response more than the other. Let's use another analogy. If you think of your immune system kind of like an octopus, right? All these different arms. Each arm does a specific thing. In bowel disease, we see the implication of three main pathways of the immune system. Th1, Th2, and Th17, we call them. Now, Th1 is going to manage things like viruses and bacteria. It activates one of your cells called there's a lot of things, but one in particular called macrophages. These will go in and kind of eat things like Pac-Man. Th2, so this one's going to be, I'll put virus and bacteria. Th2 is going to manage other things. It's going to manage parasites and allergens. So this is that histamine response. Remember we talked about foods? Low histamine? That same immune pathway is implicated and they can cause that same issue. And this is where we'll see also eosinophils, white blood cell activity. You might have a stool sample that shows high eosinophil activation protein, or your eosinophils in your blood work might be elevated. It's a type of white blood cell. The other one that we see as well in Th17 is also types of bacteria and fungi. So candidas and different microbes as well, and these activate neutrophils. Well, what is calprotectin? It is a byproduct of excessive neutrophil activity, right? Like cars, when they're driving or they're idling, they're producing exhaust. Your neutrophils are producing calprotectin, kind of like exhaust. The more of them there are, the more exhaust we have, the higher the measurement, the higher the activity. Therefore, we say you're really inflamed. This is a byproduct of these immune pathways. And so what happens when you say, I want to boost my immune system, you pick one and drive it up. You drive up that inflammatory response. You drive up that histamine response. We don't want to drive it up. We want to balance them. It's that balance that actually rejuvenates and restores your responses back from being all crazy and out of whack to being equal. Right? If you're super high strung, stressed out, bad day at work, stuck in traffic, forgot your lunch, ate McDonald's, shit your pants, all these things are going on, it's a bad day. You come home and your partner or your kids, someone's screaming and yelling, you lose it. You have a breakdown, you scream, you yell, whatever your response is, because you're overdone. Your immune system is overdone. We are bringing it back down to calm, helping it chill out so that response can be, this is a bit of an inconvenience, but we'll address it. That's what we're looking for. And that's the importance of rejuvenation. So one more time. Food. 3 rules. Very, very simply. Whole foods, tolerable foods, low histamine foods, so we're not driving up these immune pathways. Okay? Number 2, we have to identify the root. It's going to be some form of toxin, some sort of deficiency, so either in microbes and or in nutrients, as well as microbial imbalances. We'll typically see some invaders like parasites and fungi, E. coli, salmonella, whatever bacteria, viruses, CMV, EBV that we see. The next, we want to begin removing it, which is part of opening your drainage pathways. We're going to remove that problem, that toxin, kill off the microbes, whatever it is, we have to get rid of it. And then we have to replenish your nutrients because, again, deficiency is a key component. We want to rebuild your gut lining because it's damaged. Your microbes need a house to be able to thrive and no longer become deficient. And again, it also reduces your immune responses from leaks. We want to repair that ecosystem, get those microbiome and those viruses and bacteria, fungi, all back to balance, and then rejuvenate these imbalanced immune responses to calm things down. This is the process in reversing bowel disease. It is very doable and very fixable. Guys, this is an outline that you will see in books, my book coming up. You will see in textbooks over the coming, hopefully, less than 20, 30 years, but you never know. Maybe we're seeing, right now on average, unfortunately, it takes 17 to 20 years for something to go from research to publication down to actual practice, sometimes upwards of 30. In fact, there were things my naturopath was telling me back in the 90s. It was telling my mom, like aluminum in deodorant's bad for you. Just broke major news about 4 years ago. Aluminum, bad for you. They already knew it 30 years ago. And so it takes a long time for these things to go from common sense to figuring it out to actual study to practice to the masses, to you effectively. And so you have to advocate for yourself so you don't have to do this for another 30 years. And so here's what I want to do for you guys. If you know me, if you know what we do, you want to be part of the 300 plus cases that have now been reversed and learn what is your root? What are your drivers? What do these steps actually look like for you? How do we identify that? Each one of these is subtle and nuanced based on you and your needs and your individuality. It's very simple. All you got to do is check the links below the video or in the show notes below the podcast. And there's a link there. You can send me an email directly if you like. You can book a call and schedule in to see, is this a good fit? Call's free. We just want to learn about you. We just want to know, is this possible? Can we help you? And what will that process look like? So all you got to do is click those links. Let me go to the comments here. What questions have we got today? Laura had asked, what if your gallbladder was removed? Can that affect things? Yes. Does it affect that you need drainage? No. Your gallbladder is merely a storage vessel. Really, that's what it is. Your body, your liver is going to produce all this bile and it just puts it into your gallbladder. So when you eat a high fat meal or something else, it squirts out the appropriate amount to the small bowel and says, okay, go break down those fats. But if you're experiencing any kind of GI issue, if you had your gallbladder removed, you need more drainage and like bile duct support than anybody else, because your bile ducts inside your liver were so gunked up and so sludgy, it led to your gallbladder storing rocks or stones or thick bile or something else, which led to the need for removal. Now again, a lot of the natural way, I'll come to the Instagram in just a sec, we see your question there. In the natural way, we say, well, we can often thin that out and thin that bile before getting your gallbladder removed, do flushes, remove stones. There's all kinds of ways to do it. They just go to removal. The challenge is now, if your gallbladder's been removed, how do we, really what you're gonna need is an ox bile supplement for the rest of your life. But before that, we need to clean your liver. We need to go through, support the drainage pathways because they are all junked up. And if your liver's messed up, probably your lymphatics are junked up too. If your lymphatics are junked up, it's common to have skin issues as well. So there's a process we have to go through here. So the root cause of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's are the same. They're the things we talked about here. Now there's different forms of zinc, mind you, and I'll get to that in a sec. But the root cause of colitis and Crohn's, there's three things, three umbrellas. I'll go over it one more time. So the first one is going to be toxins. The next is going to be deficiencies. Okay, in toxins, this is anything. It can be mold, it can be chemicals, it can be pesticides, it can be heavy metals, it can be, you name it, right? Stress, again, stress doesn't cause bowel disease. Stress causes imbalances in your microbiome and immune system, which contribute to, but toxins are a main driver. Then we have deficiencies of nutrients or deficiencies of microbes in your microbiome. If you're lacking certain microbes, you're lacking soldiers in your army, you're lacking defenses. Your microbiome is a huge factor in your immune system. And actually 70% of your immune cells are made inside of your digestive system. So that's a really important part of it, okay? So we have toxins, we have deficiencies, and then we have microbial imbalances. Now microbes, it can be, again, it's a deficiency, but we also see invasive microbes. We see overgrowth of fungus, overgrowth of candida. We see sometimes mold in the system, if it's a mold toxin or mold in the system you've ingested. We see parasites. We see viruses, particularly cytomegalovirus or CMV, or Epstein-Barr, which is EBV. We see E. coli and all kinds of infections that cause a problem. And someone else might go, well, I've had, common one I see is, I had antibiotics a lot or once or twice powerful, and I ended up with bowel disease. Deficiencies. You dropped your defenses, something else grew in or came in, or they weren't getting rid of the toxins like they should have. These are the three causes. Now, does zinc help? Yes, zinc can help with some of these immune responses, but also something specific, a form of zinc, because there's different kinds, like picolinate, etc. Zinc carnosine has been shown to help actually restructure or be part of rebuilding that gut lining, that barrier, that mucosal layer in your intestine, especially your large bowel. So that can be really, really helpful. We do see that in colitis. But again, I want to be very specific that just supplementing is numbing cream. Because what we end up getting into without realizing is we end up with what's called plant-based medication. We end up supplementing so many supplements and plants and herbs and vitamins that what we're doing is we're managing the problem. Supplements should be used very deliberately and specifically. I'm taking this thing for this purpose. I'm getting rid of this object or this microbe or whatever it is from my body. When that's gone, I'm done. And here's the next thing I move on to. So they have a purpose, they have a start, a middle, and an end goal. That is using supplements for a purpose. If we just use them for forever to constantly keep up, like spraying enough water on a fire, not enough to put it out, but just enough that it doesn't blow up and get worse, that's managing. That is plant-based medication. Hope that makes sense. Next question we have over here comes from Anne Marie. What are symptoms if the liver is full of stuff and needs to be cleaned? Lots. You can get nausea, vomiting, trouble digesting fats, illnesses, prone to flus and viruses. There are so many symptoms that can show your liver's junked up. A very common one, when you eat fats, do you get diarrhea? Do you have greasy, oily stools? Those are probably the easiest ways. You could also physically press on your liver. And you can do that. It's on your right side, right? Under the rib cage here. If you actually take your fingers and press in and put some pressure on that liver, if you're like, it kind of hurts. It can be that the bile ducts inside your liver are so sort of junked up, it's a lot of pressure. And by putting extra pressure, it hurts and causes pain. Those are great ways to tell if your liver's a bit gunked up or junked up. We have another question, go ahead.
Does cat's claw help with ulcerative colitis?
So this is, again, I want to be very cautious to say I wouldn't be looking to specific immune modulating things. Sometimes cat's claw in the right person, depending on what your responses are. This is where we have to be very careful. What is your immune system saying? What imbalances are we experiencing in your immune system? If you're taking cat's claw, for example, it can push and pull immune pathways. Well, if you push and pull the wrong, even curcumin can be very problematic for some people because we're pushing and pulling the wrong immune pathways. So if you push down one that's well balanced or overactive, it might help. But if you push one up that's already overactive, then you're causing a problem. And you'll find cat's claw might make you much, much worse. In fact, I don't think I've used cat's claw as a precaution because generally I find it problematic. I haven't used that in the last hundreds, probably 200 cases. I haven't even touched cat's claw. And we want to be very, very careful with certain immunomodulating herbs. Unless you know what you're doing, what your immune responses are, and what response you're trying to elicit from those supplements or herbs, we want to be very, very careful. I wouldn't go trying to modulate your immune system on yourself because you could throw yourself into a flame. I've been in the hospital. We want to be very careful with that. Laura had asked, ox bile supplements. I was distracted, so I wasn't able to catch on. That's fine. So go back and check that one out. But long and short, your gallbladder. Here's the thing about ox bile. And that's quite exactly what it sounds like. Ox like the animal and bile to emulsify fats. Ox bile supplements. Your gallbladder, right? So your liver will actually make all this bile, right? And it puts it into your gallbladder. The gallbladder will squirt it into the small intestine, and that's where we begin digesting all this food in the squiggly bits, or emulsifying the fats. So what happens is gallbladder, it's a storage. So picture you have a tap, right? You want a glass of water. If all you get from the tap is drip, 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 you're still going to be thirsty. But if you have a glass of water and go dump, you chug it down, you get what you need. That's kind of what happens. Your liver is dripping out this bile and it puts it into the glass so it's full. And then you have some fats and it empties the whole thing. That's how we're digesting our fats as part of what we call emulsification. Think about oil to water. It goes from this thick substance to this oily, absorbable, breakdownable thing. And so what we're taking ox bile, because your body lacks the gallbladder to go dump, ox bile is that dump. It's that pill you take, which is it's bile, and you take that down and it can break down things for you if you don't have a gallbladder. And I typically recommend anybody, almost, now I don't know you specifically, it's not medical advice, but I typically recommend if you do not have a gallbladder that you support with ox bile at the very least. It's a very important part of the process. But again, if you had your gallbladder removed, it means your liver was in trouble to begin with. Your gallbladder doesn't get messy on its own. The liver gets in trouble. That causes a problem, a downstream problem in the gallbladder. And so by having your gallbladder removed, you're managing one of the symptoms. You're not fixing the problem, which is in fact your liver. Guys, that's great. Easy in, easy out. You know what to do. If you need help, just have a conversation with us. It's not a complex process. It takes about half an hour. I want to learn about you, see what's going on. Can we help? Can we not? Maybe we can't. I've yet to come across somebody who can't. Maybe we can talk about the possibility. Just knock on the door. There's one word between you and getting the help and just understanding, exploring this process and seeing what does it look like. And that word is the word solution. If you're here on YouTube, you're here on the podcast, make sure you check the links below and you can send me an email, schedule a call, whatever you want. There's tons of resources out there. Guys, we have a podcast dedicated to IBD. It's all these talks are on the podcast. So you can get for free. They're on YouTube. Send me a DM if you need anything specific and want those links. That being said, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you guys all next week. One of my favorite things to hear as an IBD specialist is something along the lines of, I learned more from you in 15 minutes than from my doctor in 15 years. And if this for the first time is really starting to click and it's starting to make sense and you're going, wait a minute, this might be reversible. I think there's more that I can do. This condition came out of nowhere. It happened to me out of the blue. I was healthy for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and suddenly I wasn't, and you're telling me there's no cause. If you're understanding finally that there is a cause, that something is driving this, I want to invite you to check the link in the show notes below. Send me an email, ask a question, see if a program is the right fit for you, because I promise you, this doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence. You're not doomed to this, and IBD can be reversed.